Welcome to Economy Disrupted. I'm Matthew Goodman, Senior Vice President for Economics at CSIS, and delighted to have you back for Season 2 of our program, in which we look at economic forces that are disrupting the global and U.S. economies, and talk to a special guest about those issues. We're going to focus on 4 topics in this season. We're going to look at trade, technology, climate change, and changes in the workforce. And we're going to bring in a perspective from outside the Beltway, which will, I think, really enrich this conversation. I'm delighted this season to be joined by a new co-host, Sarah Ladislaw, who is my colleague here at CSIS. She's Senior Vice President and Director of our Energy Security and Climate Change Program. Delighted to have you with us, Sarah.
Thanks, Matt. I'm really pleased to be joining you for this season.
So we'll introduce our guest this week. We're going to talk about the great state of Arkansas and get a view from there. But before we talk to our guest or introduce our guest, we're going to show you a brief video with some background that will help set the scene. So please go ahead and roll the video.
Today's focus is the U.S. state of Arkansas. With a population at just over 3 million, Arkansas boasts 5 homegrown Fortune 500 companies, including Tyson Foods, J.B. Hunt, and Walmart. Agriculture is a key industry in the state, contributing over $21 billion to state GDP in 2020 and accounting for 1 in 5 jobs. In non-farm employment, Arkansas has a mix of key industries, including trade, transportation and utilities, manufacturing, and business services. Despite a year of economic turmoil, Arkansas finished 2020 with an unemployment rate of 4.9%, a rate well below the national average. The state has strong ties both in the region and internationally. Arkansas's top exports include aircraft and spacecraft, nuclear reactors, cereals, electric machinery, and plastics. Top export destinations are Canada, Mexico, France, China, the Netherlands, and Japan. In the year 2021, state leadership is focusing on continuing to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as economic recovery from the pandemic, financial resilience, creating new jobs, drawing more investment, expanding market opportunities for farmers and small businesses, and expanding high-speed internet access across the state.
And now I'm delighted to welcome our guest, Governor Asa Hutchinson, who is governor of the great state of Arkansas, and he's also vice chairman of the National Governors Association. Welcome to you, Governor.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks for showing that wonderful video highlighting the state of Arkansas, in which I'm very proud and honored to be with you today.
Excellent. Delighted to have you. Well, let's jump right in. So let me ask you about that point made about your low unemployment rate, or relatively low. It's, I'm sure, not low enough for your taste, but you did better than a lot of states around the country through COVID. Can you explain why did that happen? And coming out of COVID, when things get more back to normal, what do you see the biggest opportunities for job growth in the state?
Well, first, you mentioned that in the video that we had a 4.9% unemployment rate, and that was true in December. We had our January numbers come out, and we're 4.6%. It may be adjusted, but it shows continued progress in our employment numbers. And how did we get here? We started off with a very robust economy before COVID hit. We have a great foundation in Arkansas with agriculture, with international exports, with the manufacturing base that we have that was continuing to grow. We were down at a 3%, 3.4%, I believe it was, unemployment rate. And so we had a very, very strong foundation. We've lowered taxes, which helped us to have a pro-business environment in this state. We have a favorable regulatory environment. And so all of that led to a significant growth in jobs and in our industry and our economy in the first 5 years that I was governor. And then COVID hit, as you know, and I think we made some good decisions. I'm sure history will say we didn't make all home runs, but I believe it was the right thing to do whenever we were having enormous pressure to shut down our economy, to shelter in place. We were one of the few states that resisted that. And while we had some business restrictions in place, restaurants and some of the face-to-face industry, we kept everything open. We did not shut down our economy. And as a result of that, whenever we started getting things in control, everything else started opening up, ours came back much quicker because of that. And so while we suffered in the hospitality industry, which is our number 2 industry in Arkansas, is tourism, people coming here, and the hotels, it is the sea in our state parks. And of course, that was hit very dramatically. And then restaurants associated with that obviously has taken a hit as well. And so we kept our economy moving. We lifted restrictions when we could. And then we also have helped using our CARES Act funds to help our small businesses and those that suffered from restrictions. And now at this particular point, at the beginning of the month of March, I converted all of our restrictions, actually ended all of our business restrictions, converted them to some guidelines, gave some incentives. And so we're open now with continued emphasis upon public health and safety, but at the same time, our businesses are having more flexibility to manage, to take care of their customers, and that's helping us to grow as well. So I look for a very dynamic future. And one thing I'll mention is that, our unemployment rate is going down fairly quickly. People are hiring again. And then we have the challenge, of course, that we have a significant amount of federal money that's coming in that provides some needed assistance for those that are struggling with rent and with food or unemployment. But it's also can serve as a disincentive and temptation for some to say, well, I can make more money on the side than I can going back to work. And that's a little bit of a challenge and will continue to be a challenge for states like Arkansas in the coming months.
Great. Well, let me just, if I could follow up, the economy is changing for a lot of reasons, beyond COVID, in addition to COVID, because of trade and technology. And we're going to talk about some of those issues in a second. But just how do you think about preparing your workforce? What kind of skills programs are you implementing, and what do you think works best, and what are the biggest challenges to pursuing some of those policies?
Well, as a result of some of the changes in the economy, we are focusing, like many states, on a reskill. If somebody is moving from a hospitality industry into a different field, we want to provide that support, and we are investing in what we call a Ready for Life initiative, which helps match the employers with the skills that are needed and putting the state resources into reskill or upskilling for the workers. And so we are concentrating on that. One of the things that we did early on, and this is before the pandemic, but the pandemic reinforced how critical the early decisions that we made were. And that is, we were the first state to mandate that computer science coding be offered in every high school in Arkansas. And then we move that down through our K through 8 grades. We've continued to enhance that. We're putting legislation through right now that should be on my desk soon that says we're going to require every student in high school to have a computer science course as a graduation credit before they can graduate from high school. This is a dramatic shift, and this underscores the fact that these kind of tech skills are needed whether you're in agriculture, whether you are in advanced manufacturing or in retail, logistics, or medicine. This is giving our team here in Arkansas the skills that they need for the new future post-COVID. And of course, now that we've had the experience of the last year, it reinforces the need of people to be able to work from home. They can run the world from their front porch in Lone Oak, Arkansas, if they have high-speed internet and those kind of computer science skills. And so that's going to make our workforce more mobile, more responsive to the high-tech demands of a post-COVID environment, and we're going to continue to emphasize that.
Excellent. Well, that's a good segue, because I think Sarah is going to ask you about technology. So over to you, Sarah.
I was just going to say the same thing. Thank you very much, Governor, for joining us today. You know, you've mentioned broadband internet access as being a main priority for your administration over the last year, and really focusing on the role that it plays in equity in education. As the mother of somebody, a couple kids who've been doing their schooling for the last 12 months from my living room, I certainly understand the importance of that flexibility. But I was just wondering, you know, what's your perspective over the last year and how the importance of expanding broadband internet access has been for things like equity in education, but for a whole host of other things? What are the things that you've learned? What are the challenges that you've encountered?
Well, there have been many challenges, and I recognize that, as many leaders did, as being a need that we have in rural America for high-speed internet in the rural areas of our state and country. So we recognize the need, but what the pandemic did was to put color behind the reality. It illustrated it with common stories that grabs at your heart. And so we did everything whenever we shut down our schools to in-classroom instruction last spring, or I guess that would be the spring of 2020. We restarted it in the fall of 2020. And so we've restarted with in-classroom instruction with virtual options. And so, but whenever we shut it down, it was very, very difficult, because we soon realized that the students couldn't go home and do homework. They couldn't learn virtually. And we provided hotspots where they could take those home. And that was a great benefit to our rural schools. But that's a temporary fix. And then we have invested much of our CARES Act money in our Arkansas Rural Connect program, which is a grant program of state dollars utilized to expand high-speed internet in the unserved areas of our state. That has added tens of thousands of new families that have that remote access now. But we're still short. And so one of the things that we're going to do with the new American Rescue Plan funds that will come to our state will be to invest in rural broadband. And it's going to be a large sum of money that we put there. When you think about it, we have a balanced budget. We actually have a $400 million surplus in Arkansas, and we've cut taxes. So we really don't need, and it would be a shame to take federal dollars to shore up our budget, which doesn't need shoring up. And so we're going to use that for long-term structural investment that will help us to have the access, reduce the equity challenges in education, that will give not just access and education to our rural families, but how about that business that wants to move to Arkansas, but they want to be connected and they're necessary to connect. This allows them to operate not just in Little Rock or Northwest Arkansas, where we have high-speed internet and great access, but it allows you to go to rural areas, which people are thriving for in today's world. And so a lot of opportunities for us. And I think you're going to see our population increase as we increase that internet access.
Well, that's great to hear that those opportunities are coming to make that lasting change. That's good news indeed. I want to pivot a little bit, though, to the broader picture of the tech sector in Arkansas. You've got a lot of high-tech companies, high-tech services companies in the financial and management and then sort of other professional services side of the equation. What do you see as the growth prospects for the high-tech industry in Arkansas, and how do you as governor help them compete nationally and internationally? It's a very competitive landscape. How do you see your role in helping them out there?
A great question, and thank you for it. And we do have a burgeoning tech sector in Arkansas. Foundationally, of course, it's critical to our global logistics companies, again, from Walmart to Tyson's, but it's also a growing part of our future in the smaller tech corridor. I say we want to be a micro hub of technology companies in Arkansas, and micro hubs have a way of growing into larger hubs. And we started with, of course, building the foundation of the talent supply, emphasizing this in high school, but our coding academies in our Our 4-year and our 2-year institutions have aided in showing that we have the talent to build those kind of tech companies. And then we've engaged in recruitment efforts. And we have brought in tech companies here into Arkansas that have moved from out of state. They've come here because they see the talent and they see the entrepreneurial spirit and they see the capital that's willing to invest in startup tech companies. And then the third thing we did is we created, with state dollars, partnering with industry, accelerator programs. And so we have fintech, and Arkansas is sort of the home of fintech with FIS that has had its start and origins here in the financial sector. So we have accelerator programs bringing in top talent in the tech industry in a particular field, whether it's financial services or whether it's healthcare or whether it is the innovation of the future. They come here, they're mentored here, they have funding here, and we bring top tech talent here. And of course, our design is to keep some of that talent here and some of those startup companies when they see the opportunities here. And that's been a very successful partnership with the tech sector in the investment of these accelerator programs, and they are starting to produce jobs.
Excellent. Really, really important set of developments, and such an important sector for you to be, focused on and investing in, and we're going to be watching those developments carefully. It's really, really important. So let me shift a bit to trade. So trade is a topic we talk a lot about here in Washington. It's a difficult issue politically, and maybe even more difficult here in Washington over the last few years. But the sense out there is that actually there's a lot of support for trade. You yourself were quite a supporter of the U.S., Mexico, Canada, USMCA free trade agreement. How does trade work in Arkansas? Why do you support agreements like that? And what do you think the future of trade is from your point of view?
Well, of course, international trade and access to the global markets is essential for a state like Arkansas, from agriculture to our manufacturing. That access is critical, with Canada and Mexico being leading trading partners. So the new NAFTA, USMCA, was absolutely essential for us to have. I applaud the Trump administration confronting a lot of skepticism that it could be done, a lot of naysayers, and I was skeptical about it myself, but what they pulled off was a much needed modernization of our North American free trade agreements that will serve us well here in Arkansas. And then I think it's a different story whenever you look at the move toward bilateral trade agreements abroad that slowed down our trade agreements, that slowed down our access to some of the international markets. The war that we got in terms of trade with China was a real threat to our agricultural exports, but our farmers understood the need to be tougher with China in terms of trade, and they were supportive of that renegotiation. It hurt us in the manufacturing sector. We were at the time trying to recruit manufacturing industries from overseas here to Arkansas, some of those being from China. We had a multi-billion-dollar investment here, and because of the trade tariffs on equipment coming in, that got put on the back burner and is no longer an active project because of the trade war. It suffered the consequences of that, and that resulted in loss of jobs here in this state. And so we depend upon jobs based upon foreign investment and foreign trade. And whenever you see over the last year that our trade imbalance has actually increased despite our raising tariffs and trying to have more protective measures, it makes us look to the Biden administration and very interested in the tough decisions that's going to have to be made. And that's probably the most interesting one, is how the Biden administration is going to approach China. Do you continue the trade war with the high tariffs? Do you negotiate different agreements? Do you take a hard line, or Do you recognize them as a partner that can work with us on the security areas? Do you see them as someone that we want to change from a competitor to an enemy? Or are you going to keep them in a constructive, competitive relationship that we can use them as a strategic partner on countries and issues like North Korea, nuclear armament, and other issues? So these are fundamental questions that this administration is going to have to answer. From my standpoint, we want access to those markets. We want to have enforceable trade agreements and more fair trade. And we also want to bring more manufacturing back here. And that's a balance, and we've got to send the signal to American manufacturing: invest in America, make sure we have that foundational manufacturing capability here. And then secondly, let's do that in a way that doesn't destroy our access to other markets. They have to have access to our markets. We need access to theirs, with an emphasis on making sure we have that manufacturing base here. Those are the key goals of the trading relationships that we should have.
Well, you very eloquently made the case for trade and for inbound investment, and I can see that from Arkansas's point of view, those markets are really important for agriculture and other products that you sell. And then also on the investment side, when foreigners bring in manufacturing or invest in existing or new manufacturing capability, that creates jobs. But on the other hand, you do have other parts of the economy that are dislocated by trade, by imports, and there's got to be some resistance from some people to those developments. And then also on China, the case you made for engagement with China makes sense, but there's also a lot of sort of feeling around the country, it seems, and certainly here in Washington, that China is a real problem, a competitor, maybe even an adversary. And I wonder, whether you get some of that from people in Arkansas, that we shouldn't be cozying up too much to this country, or it's causing some, real dislocation to our lives in some way. How do you hear that, and how do you respond to that?
Oh, absolutely. There is a sense, and it's based upon reality, and I fully agree with it, that China represses human rights, doesn't exist there. They do understand economic opportunities, but it's not accompanied by total economic freedom. And so it's full of problems. And we have to figure out the right path to not close off the second largest economy in the world, not close it off, and we can't disconnect our economies, but at the same time, we need to balance that need with an understanding that they need to change behavior, that they need to loosen up in terms of their freedoms. That's a long march, but it's one that we have to be able to undertake, and that's fundamentally how the people of Arkansas see it, as China going off course in terms of the repression of rights. Now, they're also unfair in terms of trade, and they want us to be tougher on that. So all of that is absolutely true, and that has to be recognized, and that has to be dealt with. But there also is a sad result of that. Whenever you have anti-China rhetoric that is at the political sense and at the governing sense and trade sense, somehow that it can be translated into an anti-Chinese actions and fervor here in the United States that's unhealthy for our country. And I appreciate the need to make sure that we recognize that we have a large number of Chinese Americans that are great citizens and love freedom here and are part of our economy. We want to make sure that we don't tilt the scales and become filled with intolerance in our country toward that diversity. So it is a balance that we have to achieve, but and it can be done. If you look at, like you mentioned, the importance of our manufacturing here and how some people are dislocated in their business because of foreign trade. That is a true statement. But how do you address that? Do you address that by building enough tariffs to protect our industries? Because when you do that, there's a dislocation cost to building up tariffs in every industry, because that's going to hurt some. And so my answer to it is let's be competitive. Let's bring back manufacturing. And we were successful in Arkansas in building manufacturing back here in this country after we lost so much with the first NAFTA deal. And that was a good example that there was a dislocation from the first NAFTA that we lost manufacturing jobs. Then over the course of time, we adjusted to that, and those manufacturing jobs are coming back, and we're capitalizing on that. Arkansas has, I believe we're 6th in the country on the percent of our workforce that have experience in manufacturing. And we want to have those jobs here. And because of what we've seen with our pharmaceuticals that we've had to try to import, that has to start there, that we can manufacture that again here in the United States.
Excellent. Well said, and I particularly appreciate your statement about Asian Americans, which is a real problem that we should all be very vigilant about and pushing back on that kind of attitude and behavior. So I appreciate that. So Sarah, over to you.
Great. Governor Hutchinson, I want to switch gears and talk about climate change in a minute. But before I do, I just want to remind our colleagues tuning in, we're going to turn to questions in a minute. So if you haven't submitted a question, we're getting a bit of a list. So please do so using the Ask Question button on the screen. Governor Hutchinson, so talking about climate change, I want to talk about two parts of it. One, the impacts, and then two, sort of this transition to a lower carbon energy future. The Environmental Protection Agency, talks about the major impacts of a changing climate for Arkansas being fairly familiar: stronger floods, stronger droughts, the stronger weather patterns that we've come to expect from climate impacts. Not too long ago, we saw really severe winter storms go through Arkansas and other parts of the country that were quite devastating. I'm curious about how you think about those impacts over time and what you're doing as governor to help both individuals and your industry sort of adjust to the realities of a changing climate.
Well, you start with a commitment to a diverse energy source. And whenever you have a diversity of energy sources, then that not only gives you balance, it gives you protection in the energy supply, but it also helps you to meet the challenges that we faced with the severe winter storms that we just experienced. And that was mostly illustrated in Texas, but we had our own challenges here. And one of the things that we have done that I did was to initiate a task force on energy supply that we're bringing together the leaders in the energy community to look at our experience in the last severe storm system that did cause disruption. It caused some rolling outages here in the state. They were fairly minimal and brief, but it gave you enough alarm bells to say we've got to make sure that we're prepared for this in the future. And we're fortunate that our regional transmission systems we have two of them that have offices here in Arkansas. We have multi-state supply chains for our energy, and that is worked very well for Arkansas. And so because we can share the burden with other states, it has to be managed well, but it's been effective for us and proven efficient. But we want to take a look what more we need to do in the future. And then when it comes to our energy supply, one of our leading energy companies is Entergy, our electric suppliers, and they just announced that they were converting two coal-based energy supply sources to phase them out. And so that will be converted presumably to gas, but we'll see. But they're going to be phasing those out of the system, and that's going to cause a greater investment in other energy sources. We have nuclear here in Arkansas. We have good hydropower here, and we have a growing solar power industry here in this state. We have a lot of sunshine in Arkansas, and so it makes us a good solar state. Wind energy is not as efficient as it might be in Oklahoma or Texas, but solar power is very effective here, and it is growing, and our Public Service Commission has set up policies that encourage the development of solar energy and making sure that that has access to the grid. We're going to see that continue. Another thing our Public Service Commission is doing is looking at the demand response policy so that whenever we get a huge surge in demand, that there could be voluntary action by our industry groups with some incentives perhaps that will reduce that demand during key high points of the energy demand. And so those are just a couple of things that we're doing. We want to be an energy diverse state, and we want to be one that reduces the carbon output in the future, but we want to do it in an effective way. One of the things that I've noticed about the Biden administration is, and I read his executive order directing all of his departments to review the social cost of carbon. And whenever you look at what the social cost of carbon, 1 ton of carbon was during the Obama administration, how that was reduced in terms of its measurements during the Trump administration, and the expectation is that it's going to go way up again based upon this new analysis in the Biden administration. And we're worried about that from a state perspective, because I think this administration has a tendency to set federal policy and override the partnership with the states in many cases. And we're worried that the federal review is going to result in a greater federal regulatory action that's, while we're going in the right direction in improving our energy policy, we don't want to have that accelerate to the point that it's going to be costing us jobs and it's going to be costing consumers a great deal of money.
It's really interesting to hear your perspective on all the different component pieces of the energy industry that are really churning in Arkansas, and that you see promise and potential both for increasing or decreasing emissions and thinking about greater efficiency and competitiveness in that space. There's one other opportunity that might be coming down the line in the near future, which is infrastructure. There's a lot of things going on in the energy space, in the climate space, as it relates to infrastructure, both building infrastructure that will be resilient to a changing climate, but then also thinking about building infrastructure that can help to advantage some of these new energy technologies that you've talked about. This is a priority for the Biden administration. It's also a priority for, Republicans in Congress as well. I think just talking about the different kinds of infrastructure might be a bit of a dividing line, but it's also something we're seeing other countries invest a lot in. Europe, China, lots of other countries thinking about infrastructure investment in the energy space. Is this a part of your task force and your thinking as well?
It should be. That should be a part of the discussion on it, because if we need to modernize, if we need to bring in new technologies and new energy sources or expand any, that should be a topic of the conversation. What we have to keep in mind, we're not a European country or a Chinese country in which you can just take a whole bunch of money from the federal or the European Union level and put it into the initiative. Ours is all paid for by the consumers. And so if we're going to make an investment in new technologies and infrastructure, that's all costs are going to be assigned by our Public Service Commission to the ratepayers. And those ratepayers are consumers, they're industry, they're hospitals, and the hospitals share the concern of the energy costs or real impact on healthcare. And so we just have to keep in mind that while we invest in infrastructure, as we invest in new technologies, this is not something that's coming out of the sky. These are investments going to be paid for by the consumers and the ratepayers, and we have to spread it out. We don't need to get this fixed in 5 years. Let's keep making progress on this. Keep it in mind that the economy and the businesses will adjust, but they can adjust more whenever we see what the goal is. We move toward it consistently, but not disruptively in the short term that costs so many jobs.
Well, Governor Hutchinson, as luck would have it, some of the people listening online are interested in our energy and climate conversation. So I'm going to turn to a couple questions that have come from the audience on that. The first is that I'm just going to read it so you get a sense of the parameters of the question. The companies Standard Lithium and Inland Access are partnering in El Dorado, Arkansas to produce lithium chemicals for lithium-ion batteries using a novel process technology. There are these are Canadian and German companies respectively leveraging expertise to the benefit of the local economy. How can the state and local government encourage more of this to ensure sustainable transition to a clean energy economy?
Well, I'm a fan of Lanxess and this investment for Standard Lithium, and it means a lot. It's we call it in Arkansas El Dorado. It's a little bit different than the normal pronunciation of it, but a great community that has a lot of natural resources. This is where the oil production started in Arkansas, then it went to brine, and if we can develop the lithium out of this, it's going to help us in developing battery technology for the future, and this company is leading the way. I've had the privilege of meeting with them on one of my European trips, and you learn a lot whenever you travel and see the investments that other countries make, and this industry will be very, very good for Arkansas. It's just one of the good examples of innovation that can take place in the state, and it's taking place.
Excellent. Matt?
Okay, well, there are other questions coming in, and one of them goes back to kind of how we dealt with the COVID disruptions and the crisis there. And this person is asking in the context of China, because they're saying, that I'm not sure, I agree with the premise of the question, but I want to see what you think about it, which is that the Chinese government, after some initial mistakes, got its hands on this problem and seems to have, controlled the pandemic and then minimized the economic disruption, and they're one of the few countries in the world that actually grew last year. Not all of this is in the question, but this person is basically asking, is the fact that they have this sort of centralized top-down leadership system give them an advantage, and something that we don't have because we're much more democratic and more spread in our diversified in the way we manage issues. But is there a problem in our system, not fundamentally democracy, but is there something about the way we're structured that makes it harder to deal with big crises like this, pandemics, even climate change, other big problems that make it a bigger challenge for the United States?
Well, there's efficiency that comes with an autocracy. Whenever you have a top-down structure, there is a level of efficiency that can come, but it's at the cost of freedom. It's at the cost of our Constitution and our system of partnership with the states. Democracy is not always the neatest. It can be a little sloppy in democracy because you've got a lot of diverse opinions, you got a lot of checks and balances, but I see that as a tremendous advantage for our country in the long term. And I think in this pandemic is a good illustration of the federal-state partnership. Not everything was perfect, but we made the vaccines in record time. We're the envy of the world, and how the vaccine production has accelerated here in the United States, and how we're getting the vaccines out pretty efficiently, even with the partnership early on. This could not be in the United States of America a federal-run initiative to fight the pandemic. It had to be federal partnership led state by state. In terms of China, I'm not sure I would let them off the hook quite as easily as you did, at least the way I perceived it. I think there's a story yet to be told there. The lack of public information early on was a real problem coming out of China. I think it hurt the credibility of the World Health Organization that led President Trump to pull out of it. I think it is an important organization in world health, but they lost credibility because of their reliance on information coming out of China. And sure, China cracked down on it very quickly, which they had the ability to do that in a communist nation. But we're still learning a lot as to how that all developed and how that information can be better shared with the world. I'm anxious for a national 9/11 type commission to review this pandemic and the decisions that were made both at the federal level and by governors, with a lot of different decisions, a lot of different approaches, and there needs to be a very serious analysis of that because I want to learn from it, and I want to be second guessed on it. And I think other governors need to hear from that kind of review, and this needs to start. I know we're not through it yet, we're not out of the woods, but these are going to be long, comprehensive studies just to get the data right, and it's not too soon to start. And that needs to start because it's going to be a year to 2 year endeavor to complete that kind of review. And that's critically important for us to understand whether we did it right, whether Norway did it right, or Sweden or Italy. We need to know this and have that evaluation because we could be in the same boat in the future, but hopefully I won't be governor at that time.
Hey, Sarah, I know you want to ask another question, but can I just pick up on something the governor said, because we haven't really asked you about your role as vice chair of the National Governors Association, but since you mentioned, that you want to look at sort of how different governors approach these issues, can you give us a little insight into sort of how the conversation goes in the association and what issues, from COVID to other issues you talk about with other governors, and how do you learn from that conversation?
Well, it's been a year in which the governors have come closer together. We share ideas more vigorously now than we ever have. We have our weekly calls with the governors online in a bipartisan way with the administration, whether it's the Trump administration or the Biden administration. And so that's working regularly, systematically, and effectively. In terms of the type of topics, right now it's all about vaccines. And I learned from other governors as to what's effective in the efficiency or the equity of getting vaccines out. But it's also, most recently, I wanted ideas from other governors as to how they're managing the American Rescue Plan and the billions of dollars that's going to be going to each state. What's the process they set up? How are they going to manage that? And so we share those ideas and benefit from it. And every state is different, and every state might have a different kind of process. But it's been invaluable in terms of the relationship and the exchange of information between the governors. As a leader in the National Governors Association, it's a fine balance because we want to be bipartisan in the sense of giving everybody an equal voice, learning from each other, and working together when we can. But there's also vast differences in approaches, and so we have to understand and appreciate that as well. The differences with the American Rescue Plan probably highlighted it more than ever. The blue states, the red states, the governors, had different views on that, but we all recognize a need for federal assistance in some areas. We came together on that, but in terms of the amount and the itemization of it, we had vast differences, and we just have to appreciate those differences and respect each other. And I think could be a model for Washington.
Do we have time, Sarah, for maybe one or two more quick questions, and then we'll let the governor go? Go ahead.
I think we do. We have a kind of a group that's come in from the audience, and then kind of a final question we wanted to ask you. But from the audience, very quickly, there's a series of questions that are about the workforce and wages, right? So jobs is one thing, quality jobs and benefits is another. We didn't ask you about how you're addressing some of the issues around expectations, rising expectations of the workforce for higher wages or increased benefits. Could you just maybe say a few things about that, and then we can ask you one more question?
Sure. First of all, the industries that we recruit are far above the minimum wage. They are very good wage jobs that we're bringing in that can support a family and provides a good future path. And so we're increasing wage rates in Arkansas on a regular basis. When it comes to the minimum wage, the people of Arkansas raised our minimum wage to $11. Businesses adjusted to that. Whenever you look at the wages in New York City or Chicago, their wage rates are higher. And so, whenever you debate a higher minimum wage nationally, that might fit well with them, but in terms of Arkansas, that would cost us thousands of jobs, and they're jobs that marginal skilled workers might lose. They would be eliminated in favor of more technology. It's harder for them to adjust to that. And so it would accelerate changes in the workforce if you raise those artificially through the minimum wage. It's naturally happening with the jobs that we create here. And our leading industries pay far above that. So even though we're still considered one of the lowest cost of doing business states, we also have a low cost of living here in Arkansas. So we want to continue to invest in our workforce, both in terms of training, but in outcomes. And I've been recruiting industry for some time, and you used to be able to recruit an industry that might make a $50 million investment, but they would be creating 1,000 jobs. Now you might be having a company come in and make $100 million investment and only create 200 jobs. And it's because of the increased cost in technology, but these are better paying jobs. These are disruptive changes that are in our society, and we're working hard to make sure we have the skill for that, but that we have to expand in the advanced technologies, because those are going to be the jobs, and they're very expensive recruitment projects because of all of the technology that has to be invested.
Great. And Governor, one final question. We've noticed in both the Trump administration, the Biden administration, we're having this tendency towards talking about putting the interest of America, not just sort of elite foreign policy oriented America, but America in front of our foreign policy. I think the Biden administration has called it a foreign policy for the middle class. What does it mean for foreign policy to work for Arkansas?
Well, I think it's to create opportunity, to give each person in Arkansas and the middle class an opportunity to move up in terms of their income, in terms of their benefits, and in terms of their opportunity. Everybody wants to move up. And to me, you start with a foreign policy that reflects security. That's most important. That's the role, most premier role of the federal government is security. Secondly, it should reflect a recognition of that we are a global society and nobody can isolate themselves. We can in terms of our nationalistic spirit. We can in terms of our patriotism and our borders, but we can't in terms of the economy and in terms of the marketplace. And our foreign policy should recognize that as well. And then at top of that foreign policy should be fairness. And that's what Middle America wants, is fairness in our trade policy, fairness in terms of access to the markets as well. So those are, to me, important foundational principles that not just our trade policy should reflect, but our foreign policy should as well.
Excellent. That's a really great note to end on. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but that's perfect for us because we are a think tank focused on foreign policy and national security, and we don't get that sort of linkage of how this affects real lives in America. And so that's a really helpful connection that you've helped to make there. So thank you so much, Governor. I learned definitely one thing, which is I'm never going to mispronounce El Dorado, Arkansas again. But seriously, I've always been a fan of Arkansas since my childhood hero was from Little Rock, Brooks Robinson. So he was fantastic. So delighted to have you on with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
A great interview, and it's good to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Governor. And to the audience, thank you also for staying with us. Great conversation. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for your questions. Please come back and join us for our next show, which at the moment is scheduled for April 14th. We'll have more detail, and we're going to have the mayor of Dayton, Ohio, Nan Whaley, with us. So please join us for that. That'll be another interesting perspective. And with that, please stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.